Can I get my table and chair up here? One of you, where's all my buddies over there that usually gets my table? Someone get my table and chair up here. You did so awesome. Children, you can go. And I tell you, that worked out really well because that's not the song I told Clinton to prepare for. Last I heard, it was 12 Days of Christmas. And we were up there trying to get her to sing that first line on the first day of Christmas. And she just kept looking at us like, what's your all's problem? And I'm thinking, what? If she's not going to sing now, how's she going to sing after a while? I told Clinton, I said, can you learn 12 Days of Christmas in G? And he said, okay. And then she gets up here, it's like, silent. I wasn't ready for Silent Night. It was beautiful. And we're quite pleasantly amazed that she's just so courageous. Because when she told me a couple weeks ago she wanted to sing, I thought I was hearing things. So if Cammie can get up here and do that, y'all have no excuses. I love that boldness and that pretty little voice. All right. I would say y'all look good today, but we haven't gotten a miracle yet. You look like you always do. With this eye, you look like you always do. This eye, I have no idea. So anyway, it's been a weird past couple of weeks. And I'm not a person who ever gets sick, and so I don't handle sickness well because I'm confused and I don't know what's going on, and I'm not real good at sitting around the house. And so 2 weeks ago yesterday, I started getting headaches just on the right side of my head, and it got worse over the next couple days, and it would be like, not like a headache, but like pain in your head. And it would be behind my right eye, and it would move to the top of my head, then it moved to the back of my head, but always on the right side. And finally, Thursday, I went to the doctor and said, this can't be normal. I've never had this before. And they said, well, we can do a CT scan. Other than that, your vitals are all good and everything else is fine. And I'm a tightwad, and I'm thinking, okay, if a CT scan is going to show a tumor or something, it's probably too late, so I'm not going to leave my wife in debt here, so I'm not going to do the CT scan. That's how cheap I am, Jackie. I would die before I'd pay thousands of dollars for a CT scan. And then, of course, nothing ever major happens till the weekend when you can't go see your doctor. And so I got up Saturday morning, and my skin just felt really weird, and I touched my head, and it's like, oh. And I looked in the mirror, it's like, okay, now I know what's going on, and I was broke out in shingles on my forehead. Problem is, it started in my eye. We went to the ER so I could get the antiviral meds going, and they set me up to go see Dr. Werblin on Monday, and of course, it was in my eye, and I've seen him a second time this week, and because I don't know about you, but the thought of losing an eye is a little bit emotional for me, and so I ran into Dr. Werblin one morning when I was driving her to work when I probably shouldn't have been driving, and he just happened to be going in. It's like, good timing, can you look at my eye? And he said, let's go to the ER and get the microscope and look at your eye. He said, yeah, it's not any worse, maybe even a little better. But of course, since then, yesterday morning, I got up, and I probably was lucky to have 10% vision in my right eye. And if you took your eye and you coated it with a 1/2-inch Vaseline, that's what my vision looked like yesterday morning. It got a little better through the day. This morning, it's pretty bad again, and so. I'm trusting and believing that I'm one of those people that recovers from this, but right now I have maybe 30% vision in my right eye, and it's doing weird things, and it makes it weird when you walk and all kinds of stuff like that. But I'm sure that I'm over the contagious part. There's no more seeping anything going on, and that part has ran its course. It's just really waiting to get my vision back. And of course, if you've ever had shingles, you know it takes about 3 weeks to just really for everything to run its course. I'm telling you all this to say that There's a reason why I'm not going to be back there hugging everybody. It's just because I know some people aren't really all that educated on shingles, and they may think they can catch shingles. You can't catch shingles. However, pregnant ladies, the babies in them actually, and newborns that haven't had any kind of inoculations, they can catch chicken pox from your shingles. And so I'm just not going to hug anybody today where there's any kind of cross-contamination, just to be safe, even though I think I'm past all that. So I just want you to know next week I will give you all double hugs to make up for it. But it just feels so good to be back among the living today. And I know everybody says, oh, shingles, yeah, that's terrible. And yeah, it is. And I'm sure it's bad on the body too. I mean, I've heard horror stories. And on the face, my wife has had it in the same place on her face before, and I remember how painful it was for her. And in the eye, it's just been, by the time I realized what was going on, I guess it had been in my eye for several days and just didn't know it. So you just believe with me, everything is going to be restored, and we'll leave it at all that. Other than that, I don't like to be babied. My wife will tell you it annoys me to be babied. It annoys me to be singled out. I am not a person whose world revolves around sickness. I know some people find identity in that. I am the extreme opposite of that. I am very annoyed when life revolves around sickness, even though I realize at times you're so sick you can't help that, and I understand that. I'm just telling you, for me, let's talk about the weather or anything else, okay? I love you guys. I missed you, and I know you had such a good time last week. Here's how bad it was. For me to have missed my first Sunday in 23 years from sickness, I didn't even care. That's how bad it was. I just didn't even care. But as I started feeling better and watched videos and stuff, I was so moved and really was disappointed that I missed the kids, and I'm anxious to watch the video from that. Next Sunday is going to be a special Sunday. It's Christmas Eve. It makes no spiritual logical sense to miss because it's Christmas Eve, much less if it were Christmas. It is the reason for the season. Unless you're out of town, and especially if you have children, please do not teach them hideous things like, well, we're not going to church because it's Christmas Eve. We're going to do other things. Make sure you teach them He is the reason for the season, and come and let's break bread and let's remember together. We're going to sing some Christmas songs and just have a little bit of fun, and we're going to remember Him together. Unless the Holy Ghost breaks out and does some things that is not on my agenda, you'll be out of here by 11 o'clock, back doing whatever it is you normally would do on Christmas Eve. But let's come and let's worship Him together, okay? Vision. As much as I am earnestly and yes, anxiously awaiting for natural vision to return to my eye, I'll bet you God, though He may not get anxious as we would get anxious, I bet He is setting in wait for our vision to be healed, to see life the way that we really need to see life. Even with the story of Christmas, a powerful thing, and I know everybody nowadays, they get so wrapped up with what parts are biblical and what parts are cultural, what parts are man-made. And I know it seems like America, for some reason, all of a sudden this year's on this big kick about, well, He wasn't even born on December 25th. It's like, we know. If that's one of your arguments, it's not a good argument. Nobody cares. I don't care if He was born on December 25th. I care that He was born. I care that He came as one of us, and I think it's significant that whoever, for whatever reasons, pulls out a calendar and points to a day and say, let's take this day and let's just remember together. That's what's significant. What gets lost then between the Christmas carols and the Christmas cards and the paintings and the songs and the hand-me-down stories and the biblical truths, we lose sometimes the message of God and why He came. Today I want to read a short part of what we would call the Christmas story, and I want to set up this whole scene by backing up a little bit in history and helping you understand what was going on in Jerusalem and in Israel leading up to this time when this baby was born. I want to read to you in Luke chapter 2 this familiar part. says, in those days, Caesar Augustus, remember that name, issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to his own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged or betrothed to be married, or promised would be a word that we could really relate to, promised to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. This is a scene that we build so much of our Christmas legacy around. And for me, it's very important, if you're going to read a moment in time, a moment in history, to understand what happened the day before that, what happened the year before that, what happened the 100 years prior to that, what was happening in history that led to this moment. Why would God pick this time? We've been here 6,000 years, basically, with human history on this planet. Why then? What was significant about whatever the date was that he was birthed? What was it that God saw? How much does God monitor the natural parts of human history? What's going on? What's not going on? How does God decide the timing is right? I was looking back at history leading to this morning, and Pastor Tim will tell you, and maybe there's another couple of people here maybe that has went to Bible college and you've taken classes that you didn't know existed prior to that, and especially learning the history that happened between the Old Testament and the New Testament, because there's about a 300 or 400 year span there where things just kind of go silent and there's no record of what's going on. But it's very interesting stuff that helps you understand the New Testament better as you see God setting the table. And if I back up to about 175 BC, which was probably about roughly 170 to 175 years before Jesus was born, nobody really can get a handle on these dates, exactly what happened when. But it was a time where the known world, the civilized world, was under Greek rule. It's amazing when you look back in history, some of the little countries that were so dominant, and Greece being one of those, really a big island nation, and they became so dominant. And it was probably, you'd have to back up about maybe 300 years, 250 to 300 years before the birth of Jesus, before you find a famous name that was monumental in how he personally, as one human being, affected the culture of the known world, and it was Alexander the Great. He was no doubt the most famous Greek king, and one of the things that he was most famous for while he was putting the known world under his heel and destroying nations after nations so they could own those nations, he developed roads, because the army needed to go places there was no way to get the army there, and they developed roadways. And so all the modern roadways in the civilized world was because of Alexander the Great. But following Alexander the Great was a Greek king named Antiochus. And Antiochus felt like the most important thing that Alexander the Great was promoting in the civilized world was a thing called Hellenization. And how many's ever heard that word before, Hellenization? Hellenization is simply taking those things that would be standard to a Greek culture and trying to normalize those things in the other nations that they would invade. Whether it would be a language, whether it would be a dress style, whether it would be specifically Greek religion, Greek belief systems. Hellenization is taking those things that they thought to be, or at least should be considered the normal to humanity, and they would promote those things and try to standardize those things in other countries. And when Antiochus became king in 175 BC, he felt that was one of his greatest responsibilities. Greece had pushed into many parts of the world, and Jerusalem was one of those parts. And Antiochus was so bold about Hellenization that he would do whatever he had to do to promote the Greek culture. And when they moved into the realm of Jerusalem, they began to do some pretty barbaric things to promote the Greek culture. And one of the things they did, first of all, they understood that unless you abolish that culture's religion, you stand no chance to culturalize, or what they would call Hellenize, that nation. And so they outlawed Judaism. Antiochus declared it was illegal to do the animal sacrifices. They shut down the temple worship. They gathered up every Torah, what would have been their Bible, their Word of God. They gathered up every Torah they could find, and they burned them. The only Torahs were the ones that were hidden in secret. Any man who tried to stand against what Greece was doing, they were killed. They were seen as rebels, and they were killed. If it was a man who was killed because he was rebelling against what Greece was doing, then they would not only kill the husband, the wife and the children would be sold into slavery. It was a very barbaric thing. Antiochus was so brazen about what he was trying to do. He didn't destroy the temple in Jerusalem, but he erected a new sacrificial altar over top of the altar of burnt offerings in the temple in Jerusalem, an altar dedicated to Zeus, where they would dedicate to Zeus. Of course, the Jews saw this as very significant, and they saw this as the fulfillment of Daniel and the Old Testament prophets, who talked about a scene that would be called the abomination that causes desolation. Now, I know today we are loaded down with paperback books, and we're still always looking to the future for all the fulfillment of all prophecies. And with some prophecies are layered and that can be done, but a lot of prophecies in the Bible, they're spoken hundreds of years later, they're fulfilled, and you moved on. Everyone can debate this one all they want, but for the Jews, to this day, they will never have any doubt. When the altar for Zeus was built over top of the altar of sacrifice in the temple in Jerusalem, they said, this is it. This is what the prophet spoke about, the abomination that causes desolation. It was a terrible time. And it was a time where the people in Israel felt very defenseless, and they weren't really properly armed. But it was just within a few years that an era in time broke out that was very significant, that tied the Old Testament and the New Testament together. It was called the Maccabean Revolt, or the Maccabean era. And it really started with the father of a young man, but that young man himself became the significant player. His name was Judas Maccabeus. And his name meant the hammer. And he was a rebel. And he was not going to stand for what Greece was doing to his homeland. And he began to raise up small factions of guerrilla militants who would wage war against Greece in ways that Greece was not used to waging war. Guerrilla warfare in America was taught to us by the American Indian. And we employed the same thing against the British in the American Revolution. They just didn't know what to do with that. And the Greeks were the same way. And the Maccabean revolt actually worked. And it began to drive Greece out of Jerusalem. Judas Maccabeus was so excited because they seemingly had won that war that his first mission was to go back and to open the doors to Jerusalem's temple, tear down that altar of Zeus, and reinitiate all of the flows and all the works of ministry in the temple. And when they did that, they rededicated the temple. It was called the Feast of Dedication. And the name changed later, and it's a name you recognize this time of year. It's the name Hanukkah. Hanukkah, if you've seen, it's celebrated by the Jews every year about the same time with Christmas. It's the Feast of Dedication. It's remembering the time when Judas Maccabeus restored the temple back to the people of Israel and Jerusalem specifically. And the temple was dedicated. It's called Hanukkah, and to this day, they celebrate that. But just as been common all through Jewish history, they, just like most cultures, just can't get along for very long at a time. And as the priesthood began to quickly redevelop and reestablish, there became warring factions within that Maccabean era. And they couldn't seem to settle their disputes. Who was right? Who was wrong? Which priest should be the high priest? Which should be the most important priest? In the meantime, when all this is happening, the Greek rule is crumbling all around the world, and Roman rule is taking over. And I'm sure they meant well when they did it, but the warring factions invited in a Roman general named Pompey to settle their disputes, not realizing they just opened the door for Roman rule. When the Caesar at the time of Rome, Caesar Augustus, found out that the door had basically been opened for them, he obliged, and they walked through, and they established Roman rule in Jerusalem and throughout Israel. When the door opened for Roman rule, it also opened the door for a realm of darkness beyond what Israel had ever seen before. Israel already was in a mess. It was an immoral nation. That's what happens with religious nations. Religious nations always end up being immoral nations because rules and regulations will not fasten you to the heart of God. It won't. In fact, rules and regulations will develop a wedge between you and God. You will try to appease this angry God. You'll do what you think He wants you to do, but it's not going to make you love Him. It's not going to draw you to His heart. It's not going to make you want to serve Him. Religious people with proof going clear back to Adam and Eve that's driven by rules and regulations and feasts and sacrifices will always end up being a very immoral culture, and Israel was no different. They'd become very immoral. We would say inhumane. We would even say, if we went back and saw clearly the truth without blinders on our eyes, the reality of Jewish culture, we would even say that's dark and that's evil and that's a pretty ugly culture. Bringing Roman rule into it only made it worse. It was a culture that was filled with depression. That's why when Peter declared that when Jesus came, He delivered them from their empty way of life that they had become accustomed to, He was talking about depression. The people had no hope, and the only hope they had was sitting around the campfire, sitting around meal tables, and talking about, but when Messiah comes, when the Messiah comes, everything will be different. They didn't know how to interpret all the prophecies, and what they read primarily from Isaiah sounded pretty encouraging, but it sounded like He would come as a conquering king with a scepter in one hand and a sword in the other. The way they understood it is if He comes right now, He will crush Rome. He'll be even greater than Judas Maccabeus. It was a dark time, and it was an ugly, ugly time in history. And the Jews specifically, as has often been the case in history, were treated like dogs. It was an ugly existence. It was an ugly culture. It was an ugly time in history, especially the setting where God chooses to come as one of us. For whatever reason, God chooses that point in time, and He begins the whole process of salvation through a scandalous birth of a baby that would change the world. I say a scandalous birth because most of you know the true history. It would be considered a scandalous birth. This man and this woman, she's been pledged to him, no doubt, by family members. He is probably an older gentleman. She is probably a very young girl, just now coming to the age of being able to be married. It's not a romantic scenario like we would like to paint the pictures of, more than likely. And she's been found to be with child. And she knows for a fact she is truly a virgin. If I'd have been here last week, I wanted to talk about Joseph and how his loyalty led to royalty. If it were not for his loyalty to Mary and to God's plan from the angels, if he wouldn't have been loyal to that, the royalty of Jesus would have never came about. It's a powerful, powerful picture. But I put myself in the scene, understanding that, yes, angels are appearing and people are having dreams, but people have to be battling. Is this my imagination? Is this really happening? Am I losing my mind? The degree of faith that it took for Joseph and Mary to oblige the plan of God goes beyond what I can comprehend. But I do know one thing. I don't know when they got married, but I know they're not married when she's pregnant. And I know that in Jewish culture, that child is considered a bastard child. And I do know that in Jewish culture, that child should grow up without all the chances that many other children should have, because that would hang over his head. That is not a beautiful way to enter a Jewish culture. That's a very ugly way to enter a Jewish culture. Other cultures, it didn't matter. Roman culture, Greek culture, it was an immoral mess. Nobody would have cared. Were you married? Were you not married? When did you get pregnant? Who cares? But in Jewish culture, it was significant. And that's why the story plays out the way that it does. It was significant. These people are being obedient to a faith that they have found in something that is so surreal, so supernatural. As they travel to Bethlehem, they are traveling there because Caesar Augustus has been taking over the known world that has been Hellenized by Greece, and now it's under Roman rule. And he is counting his money being people and nations and cultures. He wants to know who's who and who should be paying taxes. They're going to Bethlehem not for a beautiful journey back to the homeland, but because they're forced. And this young girl is pregnant. She's pregnant out of wedlock. But this man is going to be loyal, and he's going to marry her anyway. We don't know when they got married. We don't know. But they did. And I don't know what kind of emotions that both of them were battling. I just know it probably wasn't like the Christmas cards. When they get to Bethlehem, it's not a beautiful scene where there's family members waiting to take them in, waiting to comfort them. They need comfort. They need some people to surround them and say, we're with you. We believe what you've told us about this birth and this Messiah, this Christ being inside of you. We believe it. They need to be surrounded by people, but there's no room for them in any of the houses. What the Bible calls an inn would mostly be what we maybe would call a bed and breakfast, but there's just no room because too many people are coming. It's nothing personal. They do find room in a stable in Bethlehem. That would not be the beautiful wooden stables that we put in front of our churches or have on our coffee tables. No doubt in Bethlehem would have been a cave. And it was cold and it was damp and it was not beautiful. In fact, it was probably a very ugly environment. And when that child comes forth, there probably are not great moonbeams shooting into that cave. There's probably no halos anywhere. In fact, it's probably dark and it's gloomy, and it's probably not the place that she dreamed she would be birthing her child. The emotion this girl is going through, to first have to go through comprehending and accepting, I am pregnant, there's a baby growing in me, and I know for a fact I have not been with a man. From the time she's a little girl, she's dreaming of family. She's programmed in Jewish culture. It's all about family if you're a woman. And she's finally bringing this child forth in a cave. I don't know if there were animals in there or not, like in our nativity scenes. The Bible doesn't say. But I can promise you this, there was the residue of animals in that cave. I grew up on a farm. I know what barns are about. I know what stalls are about. That cave was no different. I know they're filled with animal droppings. I know that the manger where he was laid, we imagine lining it with this beautiful straw. And I'm asking you ladies who have given birth to children, do you see that as glamorous, laying your newborn child in hay? In a manger encrusted with dried animal saliva. There's nothing beautiful about that. There's nothing beautiful about the reality of this nativity. But their faith keeps them pushing forward with the plan of God. The angel said, when he's born, I want you to name him Yeshua. The Old Testament, that was translated Joshua. Yeshua, it's a beautiful name to us, just as the birth of Jesus is a very beautiful thing to us. The reality of that name kind of matched the reality of the whole birthing scene. Jesus, the Lord's salvation, how beautiful, how perfect for the Messiah. The problem was probably every other little boy was named that. It was very common, historically speaking, in that day and time, because everybody dreamed their little boy might be the Messiah, the Lord's salvation. It's a common name, powerful to us, beautiful to us. We even think the derivative that we've invented, Jesus, is a beautiful name, and I'm okay with that. He's probably about 2 years old when the Magi show up. We paint the beautiful scene with kings wrapped in robes instead of journeymen covered in dust. And they lay out these beautiful, beautiful gifts that we see as nothing but symbols of luxury, not understanding that these gifts are simply going to finance a family on the run, on the lam, getting out of Dodge, going to Egypt, the last place you ever want to go, but it's also the last place that Herod, the anointed king of Israel, through the hand of Caesar Augustus, a lackey of Rome, he won't find us in Egypt. He can't find us in Egypt. These beautiful gifts are financing a family on the run, scared for their life, or their child. When they finally leave Egypt, they go to Nazareth. Why Nazareth? Bethlehem seems to be where Joseph's heritage is found. Why Nazareth? Could it be because Nazareth is a town of misfits and criminals? It's a good place to hide. Even Rome itself did not like to be too involved in Nazareth. If you're a soldier stationed in Nazareth, there's a good chance you're going to get clubbed over the head at night. Nazareth, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Wasn't a beautiful town. It was an ugly town. Filled with people with ugly lives. Jesus of Nazareth. We sing it, and it seems so beautiful to us when we pray in the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And it flows off the tongue with such elegance and such glamour. We take these names and we take these titles and we do to them what we have done to the nativity. We wrap them in porcelain, and we do to the scene what we do with the gruesomeness of the cross, and we wrap it in gold. We romanticize it. We paint beautiful pictures and beautiful scenes on Christmas cards. And though his coming and the reality of it is the most beautiful thing that ever happened in human history, the natural reality was not very pretty. Jesus grows up, and we live in such small, tiny boxes as we view the life of Jesus. We don't even think about that. That culture is no different from this culture. People want family. People want friends. People want security. People want to be thought well of. People want to own a home. People want to own some transportation. They want to have some money in the bank where they know they can go Krogering if they need to and buy some food. This is not the life of Jesus. By his own admission, the foxes and the birds have more of a home than he did. He never owned a house. He never owned anything. He was a man always on the move from the time his ministry began. And how discouraging it would seem to me to be doing nothing but good things for people, to only be called ugly names everywhere you go. Oh, there were a few around say, "Hey, Rabbi, Master, Teacher." But the multitude scoffed. They made fun of him. The religious people that the commoners would watch to follow suit, because whatever the Pharisees and the Sadducees say, whatever they think, they're smarter than us. They called him ugly names, and they called him a heretic, and they called him a drunk. They called him a whoremonger because he saved a whore. The scenes that we find Jesus in his ministry, they are not beautiful scenes. They are scenes filled with the ugliness of real humanity. As he lays his hands upon lepers whose flesh is rotting and falling off the bones. As he steps in to save a prostitute who by law deserved to be stoned. As he dines with tax collectors, the scum of the earth. His existence and the fruit of his existence is a very beautiful thing for us. But the reality is, from the time Jesus was born and laid in that manger, the scene was nothing but ugly. We wrap it in porcelain, we wrap it in gold, because somehow that makes us feel better about something. But I've noticed that what we have done with the realities of the life of Jesus, we've done the same thing to our lives, and we've tried to create a culture very counter to the life of Jesus. We embrace a culture that is drawn to beauty, that creates beauty, that sells beauty, that markets beauty. Everything is about beauty. And yet Isaiah makes it very clear to us there was nothing about him that stood out as beautiful. Look at these passages that Isaiah would say prophetically about him. He says, he grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. But you've seen the pictures we paint out of our imaginations. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hid their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. And just when you think this picture can't get worse, look at this prophecy of him as he is scourged and beaten. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man, and his form marred beyond human likeness. Beautiful? No. This man was only familiar with the ugly side of life. But why? Why would God go out of his way to birth the most beautiful thing that would ever happen in human history into such ugliness, a scene of ugliness as he comes into this world, and a lifetime of nothing but ugliness? Would God be so simple with us, hoping we would not miss it, that he would simply be saying, I want you to understand that in the ugliest parts of your world, I will birth salvation. But we do to our lives what we do with the Christmas story. We take our brokenness, we take our failures, we take our sin, and we wrap it in porcelain, and we wrap it in gold. And we very artistically, in an American culture, have figured out a way to take our brokenness, our failures, and turn them in a way that almost would make us look like heroes at a time that we should just be laying our lives before a Savior that we can trust with our brokenness. Could the whole plot of God simply be revolving around the concept, I am not afraid of your ugliness. I will birth in your ugliness, in your deepest failures, your deepest sorrows, your deepest brokenness. That's where I will birth. And yet, it's human nature to exhaust ourselves trying to dress our lives up when the whole point of the Christmas story is for God to come to us in the most non-intimidating way as humanly possible to say, you can come to me. I'll put my hands all over your rotting, stinking flesh, while even you are backing away saying, I'm unclean, I'm unclean. I will press towards you and I will put my hands on you and I will make you clean. When you're running for your life because you know you have insulted me, you're a prodigal. I want you to understand, I will be running towards you. I will be looking to put my hands on you, to embrace you. And I will not be offended by your ugliness. If we have become a culture that is so normalized in everything we do by what is beautiful, what is ugly, our whole world revolving around making sure we buy a house, a car, clothes, makeup, hairstyles, decorating churches, whatever it is, our lives revolve around what we believe is beautiful. And if we're doing that in the natural, what are we doing in the spiritual? We're doing what Adam did. We're doing what Zacchaeus did. We're hiding ourselves in the fig trees. We're hiding the leaves. We're disguising ourselves. We're camouflaging ourselves. We're wrapping ourselves in porcelain. We're wrapping ourselves in gold. And we're not being real with God. But I want you to know that life begins by believing I can come to God, warts and all, and say, this is me. This is me. When I laid myself on an altar 35 years ago, in the wee hours of the morning, my life, so dark, so lost. I was no longer concerned with hiding from God, disguising myself, tricking myself, much less God. I was at a point of being real. They say you've got to confess you're an alcoholic if you ever want to be delivered. I had no problem confessing that to God. I said, God, I'm a mess. I'm wrestling with alcohol. I can't seem to figure out how to cope in life and just without this being an influence in my life. It's just like I have to have this before I can go out in public and just be. I was battling low self-esteem, insecurity. That morning changed my life because it was the first time in my life I said, no more porcelain, no more gold, no more fig leaves, no more camouflage, no more excusing, no more justifying. No more making myself feel better that I'm this way because that happened. For the first time in my life, I became real with God. And I opened myself up and I said, this is who I am. Do you still want me? And there in my ugliness, He birthed His Son. Joey, would you come and play? It's Christmas. And I love what we've done with it because I think what we've done with Christmas, with all the beautiful lights and all the beautiful ornaments and all the beautiful decorations and the trees. I know some people get so stinking religious, like, well, this isn't what it's all about. You know what? We've done that because in our heart, that's really how we see Christmas. It's a beautiful thing. I believe with God, pleased. Forget the commercial side. We know we've went overboard. But just the essence of what Christmas is, I believe that God looks at it and He's pleased that we see such beauty in Him coming into this earth. We see it as glitz and glamour, and it's romantic to us, and it's porcelain, and it's gold, because spiritually speaking, that represents well. And now with that understanding, we pull back into the inner chambers of who we really are. And we must decide, is it time to let Christmas happen in me? I'm Bethlehem. Bethlehem was a cavernous region filled with empty caves. How many of you guys are Bethlehem today and you feel just your life is filled with empty caverns, empty spaces? But you're afraid to admit it because your friends think that you've got your act together and you're all that. And when you're alone, you know that's not the truth. Why are we so afraid to admit, I'm a basket case? I'm going to be honest with you and tell you, when I got out of bed yesterday morning and I tried to open my eyes and I had almost no vision in this eye, inside, I know on the outside, I sat down by the bed and I woke my wife up and I said, I need to just tell you something. I'm almost completely blind in this eye. And I was calm, and anyone else would probably sit there and go, what a man of faith. Look how he's handling it. I want you to know, inside, I was freaking out. I was freaking out. What about your faith, Pastor Scott? It's in there somewhere. Oh, today I'm much more relaxed, and I'm trusting God. This is going to be fine. It's in our weakness, He's made strong, and whatever He decides to do or not do, I'm going to cooperate and I'm going to go along with it. But my faith says I am whole. But I want you to know, I was freaking out. And it's okay if you freak out sometimes. It's okay for you to say, Pastor Scott, nobody knows this, but I am battling an addiction and it's killing me. Everybody thinks I'm so put together. I'm not put together. We're in a culture where we're under great pressure to be beautiful and have our act together. The story of Christmas is not a story of God coming into a beautiful house decorated with beautiful garland and a beautiful Christmas tree and beautiful lights and beautiful porcelain and beautiful gold. The story of Christmas is God showing up in a dark, cavernous town in a cave that's filled with animal crap, that's filled with dried animal saliva. Not a beautiful place for God to come. It's not a place where a king should be born. And yet God looks at it. He says, it's exactly where I choose for a king to be born. I want you to stand with me this morning. I told my wife, I said, all these meds have got me so emotional. I was trying to put some notes together in my office yesterday, and I was trying to type on the computer, and I was tearing up. I couldn't even put my notes together because it was too emotional. I'm thinking, man, these antivirals are killing me. I'm leaking. What is this? Jesus is seated, and a woman barges into the room, and she collapses at his feet, and she weeps, and she takes her hair, and she begins to wash his feet. And the disciples are disgusted by it. And the homeowner is quick to try to remove her from the scene. And Jesus said, leave her alone, because someone who understands that they need to be forgiven of much and is forgiven of much is so grateful for much. Is that our American culture? Are we that real? I don't think we are. The beauty of Christmas only births in a place of ugly humanity. Today, if the Lord is speaking to you, whether you be someone here would say, Pastor Scott, God is speaking to me today. I'm that empty place. I'm that cave. I'm Bethlehem. I'm that stable. I just feel empty today. God's not in my life. I come to church some, but man, I don't have any life in me. I'm battling all kinds of stuff inside. Can I tell you something that I probably shouldn't tell you? And I don't want you to leave here telling anybody Pastor Scott was suicidal this week, because that's not what I'm about to tell you. But I want you to know God puts us in places where we can relate to other people so we won't be so judgmental when we face them. And I was in a scene this past week, under so much pain and just this junk going on in my head. I thought, it's like, in my head, do I have an aneurysm here? What's going on? Nothing would help the pain. And I told her, I said, I understand why people who are in pain, that gets no relief from their pain, finally says, I can't do this anymore, and they take their life. It could be physical pain. It could be emotional pain. It could be something they've lost in their life that they just don't know how to continue living past that loss. I want you to know God does not judge those feelings, but God is ready to birth in those feelings today. The whole point of Christmas is God saying, I don't judge you. Now open yourself up and let me birth inside of you. If I'm speaking to you on any level today, any level at all, I want you to leave your seat and come up here, because we're going to pray. And we're going to let the Son of God birth in us. And we're going to let Christmas birth in us. If you say, Pastor Scott, I don't really want to come because I don't I don't know what people are going to think. Why do they think I'm coming up here? If you're too busy worrying with that, just stay where you're at, baby. You're not ready to respond to this yet. If you're too worried about what people think, if you're battling depression, you need to be up here. Say, Pastor Scott, I don't want to admit that I'm battling depression. I'm a Christian. I'm saved. I go to church. I serve. Some of you know why you're battling depression. Some of you have no idea why you're battling depression. Some of you can point to something and say, it's because this happened that I'm battling this. And trust me, God understands that. Some of you say, I don't know what's going on in me. I've got everything I need in life. I don't know why I'm battling these things. I don't know either, but I can tell you this. As Clinton so well penned in one of his songs, we are fragile little humans. And we break real easy. And sometimes we know why we're broken and sometimes we don't. All I know in our brokenness is where Christ births. And all you have to do today is step beyond just admitting I'm broken, I'm needy, there's stuff going on in me, I need you. We need to step beyond just admitting that and find that place of faith now. We'll say, Father, I'm no longer content to live this way. Birth something new in me today. Birth salvation in me today. Birth healing in me today. Birth restoration in me today. Birth life in me today. And Father, I pray for my family. Lord, we're so churchy. We're artists at how to be American Christians. We know all the phraseology and we gather all the memes on our phone and we know what to say, what not to say, how to act when we're at church and how we can act when we're not at church. And what could you do in us if we're real? Not just admitting we're broken, be ready to let you fill and heal the brokenness, but at least starting there, saying, Father, I need you. Today, I invite you into our lives, Lord, with a reckless love. Come and wreck our guilt. Come and wreck our shame. Come and wreck our condemnation. Come and wreck our depression. Come and wreck our discouragement. Come and wreck our addictions. Come and wreck our sorrow. Come and wreck our hurts. Come and wreck those things that happened in a moment, in a place in time that we're struggling to recover from. Lord, come in with your great love and birth and wreck those things. For anyone here today, Lord, who'd say that they just simply do not know you, and they're here today because they're inviting you to come into their life and own them, I stand with them as part of the welcoming committee, Lord, saying, come into their life. Birth your son in them today. Birth a king in them today. May they know that salvation is filling their life even as a pregnancy would fill the body of a woman. As it expands and it stretches and it pushes through places and it just takes over. We love you, Jesus. I thank you for your presence today. I thank you for your word. I thank you for the beauty of who you are. Do this work in us today that can only be done by you. A work that we would say is just as supernatural as Mary thought it was when you naturally birthed the Christ in her. Fill our manger. Fill our stable. fill our Bethlehem and turn it back into the house of God it was originally meant to be. All right, guys, the supernatural is something that has to be embraced. There's a hump that sometimes it's hard to get over in the American church, not just in church, but in life at large, where people come to a place of taking ownership of the broken things in them, but then they find an identity in it and they don't move past that. The whole point of today is allowing Christ to birth in you and take over your life and bring life into you. It can never be enough just to come to an altar and to cry over the realities of our brokenness and feel better because we had a good cry or we had other people with us that can relate. We've got to be healed. We've got to let Him birth healing in us. That's your responsibility. Let Him do this work in you. I love you guys. Thank you for being real today. I'll always try to be transparent with you, even at the point of letting snot run down my nose in public, if it'll help you do the same. I love you guys. Double hugs next week. No hugs today. I love you guys. Bless you. See you Christmas Eve next Sunday.